Awesome, Trey. I appreciate you being here. And just for everybody watching, can you tell them where you're located and whatnot, just so they get a little context?
Yeah, absolutely. So, although my accent tries to hide it as much as possible, I am originally from Mississippi, currently living in Birmingham, Alabama, splitting my time between here and a fun little island called Roatan about half the time.
Right. And you're in the middle of a move, right?
Yeah, just finished it actually. This is my new setup as of
Nice.
yesterday evening
That's
at
a
like
good
11 p.m.
good little space. That's nice. So I know, some elements of the company you work for, there's certain details you keep confidential just for investors and so forth. But, we get people listening here who will be, professionals and executives of different kinds, right? People who are in management capacities, or they could just be, maybe not managing, but they're dealing with a high degree of professional responsibility. So I think it would be useful if you could just kind of share a little bit of the scope of kind of the size of the organization and your responsibilities, just so they have a little context as to what space you're operating in. That'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work for a company called Honduras Prospera Inc. What we do is we work with governments to create semi-autonomous special economic zones within which we build cities, basically. We're doing the first one right now, kind of the proof of concept, if you will. We have gotten the autonomy agreement, the governance agreement with the government we're working with, which is the government of Honduras. We spent 3 years building a completely custom, from scratch, legal governance and regulatory system from the ground up because we're exempt from almost all Honduran law. After we built this government, we are now putting it into action, basically. We've built several buildings. We have about 4 or 5 construction projects underway at the moment, and many more coming very soon. We're kind of ramping up the physical component of this city on the island of Roatan I mentioned earlier. Mm-hmm. And my role in this encompasses pretty much everything across the entire project. And this project, as you might imagine, is a lot more complicated than even your typical tech startup, right? Your typical tech startup, at least you're like, all right, I'm dealing with a software platform. My stakeholder groups that I have to worry about are customers and investors, maybe. This is a whole order of magnitude of complexity more because it's a combination of a fairly complicated master plan real estate development, a tech platform in the form of eProspera, which is our digital governance, which will basically be a digital form of government. And then the kind of HR and operations that go along with trying to build a city, market a city, and attract businesses to a city. So it's kind of 3 or 4 enterprises in one. And I do pretty much anything and everything across that entire spectrum. I'm chief of staff. I was employee number like 2 or 3 here at the company, and we're up to almost 40 now. And I do everything from marketing and communications to helping respond to journalists, podcast interviews, all down to operational issues. Team members, when they have an issue or a question or a problem, they call me and I have to help them solve it. I help the CEO with high level vision and strategy. We're right in the middle of developing our 2022 strategy right now, which he and I are doing. I do a lot of investor relations, take fundraising calls, build websites. I mean, Ty knows, but literally anything and everything.
Right. You're kind of the janitor / COO. All right. Or at least, that's the old way. I forget what was the old metaphor you used to use to describe the role?
I basically fill the gaps of things everyone else either doesn't want to do or can't do.
Right. I forget, you had some exact title for yourself. Maybe it was janitor at the time, and I challenged you on that. But so a lot of what you just said is, I want to translate that back into English for some people who are listening, because there's so many intricacies there. But really, you're building a city inside of what most people would refer to as a special economic zone, right? Making it optimized for business development. And I think what is relevant for people to see is your scope is massive, right? In terms of just the different things you've had to keep your hands in. You have to have a knowledge of real estate development, business development, investor relations, venture capital, right? All these different pieces. And are you able to disclose how much you guys have raised? Are you able to talk just so people have a sense of the scope of the project?
Yeah, sure. So in our Series A, we had raised, well, let me back up a little bit. Before our current fundraising efforts, we had raised about $20 million that we've deployed. Right. As of the last 6 months, I and the investor relations team have raised about another 30 million.
Right. Got it. Okay, cool. Just so people can see. So you're dealing with a pretty big shop, right? So, and some people here are not going to be dealing with that. They're going to be managing a small business, but they're dealing with the same types of categories of having to focus in those areas, right? either launching a sales system, which obviously you and I are working together to make happen right now, and different things like that. The one thing I wanted to have you kind of dive in on, now that we've kind of got the business context, right, of what you've been operating in, talk a little bit, if you could, about just kind of mentally and emotionally when you kind of stepped into this leadership role. What did that kind of create for you over time? Where were you kind of at, prior to getting some new tools to look at things a bit differently a few months ago?
Yeah, prior to getting the new mental models and tools that Ty has helped me develop, I was maybe not on the verge of quitting, but more like on the verge of a mental breakdown, literally. I'm 26 years old and was effectively managing across business units to people that were 40, 50, 60 years old, decades of experience, in areas about which I know little to nothing. And it was completely overwhelming. I had a imposter syndrome. Basically, I couldn't sleep most nights. I had stopped almost all of my hobbies because I was working constantly, and had I can't remember exactly the terminology I used when I initially started working with Ty, but effectively crippling anxiety. That was just like a bear trap, a vice, constantly kind of squeezing my chest and head. Yeah, it was. I was not in a good place prior to working with Ty. That's for sure.
That's a powerful metaphor, a bear vice. Yeah, and it's interesting because your predecessor, right, who will remain nameless, dealing some similar challenges as well, part of what caused a bit of a career change. And I think that there are a couple challenges you were dealing with that I think a lot of people listening can relate to, right? Particularly, I think on two fronts, and particularly people in your sort of role, right? Whether it's COO, chief of staff, manager, whatever the case is going to be. There are very often anxieties that pop up from managing up, like, having a feeling like disconnect with leadership or not knowing exactly how to mitigate that. And then also, being able to feel comfortable stepping into leading and directing, managing down, so to speak, right? And enrolling people and feeling comfortable holding a ethical place of authority. What I'm really leading to is the question of, with that being this place you were operating from emotionally, what was the impact for the business, would you say, and your productivity?
I was somehow working about 50% more than I am right now in terms of raw hours, and doing like 50% less, which doesn't even make sense in retrospect. Yeah, it was not good at all. I was failing at some projects. Almost everything I was working on was behind the deadline that had been set in some way, shape, or form. And I was missing the mark generally on almost everything I was doing because I felt like mentally I didn't have the time or the energy or the effort, or I didn't know what to do it right.
Right, right. I think a big thing too is, there was a period where you were, and everybody has had this experience where you started to hate the very thing you used to love, right? It's like you got a role, or you got a promotion, or you got a position, and it's like, or for many people, I started a brand new company, and I had this experience too when I got started. And all of a sudden you have this moment where you're like, what the hell am I even doing this for? If this is what I'm feeling. I know you had some experiences like that.
Yeah,
and
for me, that particular thing, just to highlight that point even more, like for me, that was even stronger because like this job and what we're doing is absolutely crazy. And I used to tell people when I was like at the end of high school and college, like, I'm going to build a city one day. Like I really, this is the future of kind of pushing human governance forward. This is how I'm going to leave my mark on the world. This is how I'll make sure like my name, or at least my impact, is not forgotten in history. I'm going to build a city. And everybody was like, that is crazy. You're not going to do that. No one does that. That's not an industry. It's not a thing people do. And then by the time I was 24, or 23, excuse me, I had a job doing exactly that. And the only job in the world that is doing exactly that, and that is also has the SEZ to be able to build a government right alongside of it, to actually improve along all of the relevant axes that you need to build a city. So for me to get to a point where I was waking up dreading work every day really gave me pause, because I was like, I somehow either lucked or worked or whatever my way into this 1 in a billion dream job. Why am I waking up hating it? This doesn't make any sense.
Right, right. And I think there are so many people who are experiencing that very thing. I've coached people ranging from people who are making $30,000 a year up to people who are making $3 or $4 million a year. And what I found is, your economic livelihood is not directly correlate to fulfillment. Very often it goes in the opposite direction. most people have no clue how to strike that sweet spot of being in flow and being fulfilled, much less how to activate it or reactivate it or pull themselves out of a spiral of stress and whatnot. One thing that I want to address too, because this is a big common misconception, and I don't know, my memory is maybe not serving me too well on this. I don't think this was something you totally were buying into, but I think to some extent you were, as all achievers tend to. People who have that sort of like achiever mentality tend to equate being stressed and overloaded and taking everything on their shoulders with what makes them successful.
Oh, that's exactly right.
Right. And so I think I'm curious what through some things I caused you to look at hopefully a little bit differently. I'm curious what your philosophy is now. Like, do you still think that being stressed equates to success, or how would you describe that now?
This has hilariously shifted into something I didn't think was like metaphysically possible when we first started working together. At the time, to your point, I thought like, well, I'm sure Jeff Bezos is stressed all the time. I'm sure Elon Musk is stressed all the time. And the more stressed I am, the more anxious I am. That means the more I'm doing. This is a green light. This is a signal I'm going in the right direction.
Right.
Now I am in a completely opposite headspace where if I start getting even slightly stressed or anxious, I make myself stop whatever I'm doing, step back and use some of the tools that you and I have developed together, because it's an immediate yellow or even red light. They're like, hold on, something's going wrong. I'm not thinking about this correctly. I'm not approaching it correctly. And I now am so rarely anxious or stressed about work in particular that I view it as like a red light, basically, which to tell myself that 6 months ago, 9 months ago would have been like, how could I work and not be stressed? It doesn't even make any sense.
Right. Yeah, that's great. And, suffice to say, this creates a strain on just anybody's other areas of their life, right? Their health starts to suffer, relationships starts to suffer. I know you're a newlywed, but I'm sure that there's so much more emotional energy available, right, to go around in those other areas.
Absolutely. And time. Like, I don't want to discount time either, because I was also equating like anxiety. To solve the anxiety, I need to work more and harder. And so it was just eating up basically all of my time. But being less stressed and being able to think clearly about things, I think that's really the core of it, Ty. Being able to actually think clearly instead of being in this kind of fog of war enables you to kind of cut through the crap and get 80% of the result for 20% of the effort, which when I first started working with Ty sounded crazy to me. But I literally have gone from working 70 or 80 hours a week to, if I work over 40, it is a radical anomaly.
Wow. That's awesome. So I think a lot of people are hungry for some bullet points, some nuggets to come out of this, because not everybody is, going to decide that they're going to look for coaching or extra guidance. And I do at least want people to be invigorated with a sense of possibility and have, some clear understandings of at least like what areas are going to need focus or what have you. So here's what I'm curious about. So over the past couple of months, we've covered so much, we've looked at so many different projects, right? But if you were going to kind of look back and think of like the big light bulbs, or like if there was a little leverage point, right, that is memorable, where maybe there was a new way of looking at it and it made something newly possible, or you were able to do whatever. To me, there's a lot that come up from our conversations, but I'm curious for you, which ones kind of stand out emotionally significantly, and people can derive a lesson from one or two stories here.
Yeah, let me tell the story of when we first started working together and we were setting up our current investor relations and fundraising process versus how that actually ended up.
Sure.
So when Ty and I first started working together, I had effectively sole responsibility, along with the president of our organization, for setting up a fundraising machine to do a 9-figure plus fundraise, let's say. And I had no idea how to do that. Our Series A, we had raised about 10 million or so, 9.6. And I had set that machine up, but it was totally different, right? It would that one with fewer investors. 10 million is just a lower order of magnitude, literally. And I had no idea what I was doing. And at the time when Ty and I first started working on it together, not only was I in this headspace of, oh my God, I don't know what to do. What am I going to do? I was also thinking, there's such a massive amount of stuff to do here, right? Like, that sounds daunting, setting up a fundraising machine to raise 9 figures plus. Like, how do you even do that? How do you set up the processes? How is this even supposed to work? And when I started, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to work for 2 months, 80 hours a week. Like, that's what it's going to take to set this up. Mm-hmm. And then Ty and I went through, I think in like a single 2-hour session, clarifying using the RPM methodology, which I am deeply in love with, like what I actually needed to do to cut through that fog of war and enable me to see clearly. And I am not exaggerating. I went from being certain I was going to have months of 80-hour work weeks ahead of me to get this thing set up to about 18 hours worth of direct work for me, which sounds crazy. Sounds like I'm making it up, but that's exactly what happened. And it
No, I
didn't even
remember.
take me that long, by the way.
Right. I remember that. I remember that. And the one little, the thing that I remember too is when we started that call. Well, and by the way, early on in our relationship, I remember, there was a lot more like, oh, I just don't really have the time. And, even scheduling appointments seemed like, a challenge, right? So I think even when we got on the call, it was like, Ty, I'm going to have this whole thing to do. And I'm just freaking out. And your blood pressure went right down as soon as we actually like mapped it out and you left the call. You're like, holy shit, I can actually like go have a weekend, or
Yeah,
something like that.
exactly.
That's awesome. That's a good one. What about, is there an example that comes to mind about maybe like how you've managed a team member differently or how you've related to your superior differently? Is there anything that kind of comes to mind for team type of stuff?
Yeah, I have examples for both of those things. First, managing internal teams.
Mhm.
This sounds so incredibly simple, and it is, but people overcomplicate the crap out of it. I'm managing a team right now, actually, to put together what is effectively like an intro law school curriculum on the legal system we've created. I've never been to law school,
Hmm.
nor have I ever put together a course. Okay, but that's completely irrelevant to whether or not I can manage a team doing that. And what I found working, especially from some of the kind of mental models working with Utah, it's so simple managing teams to do things like that relative to how I was trying to do it before. Basically, at the beginning, at the outset, we get crystal clear on what the desired outcome is, what the result we want from the project is. We set very clear timetables, very clear deadlines. We delegated responsibility accordingly. And by the end of our second kickoff call, I had nothing to do. It was
Right.
great. It was like I didn't have hardly anything to do on that project. Now,
Yeah.
things came up as the project went on, right? A particular team member was way behind schedule. I ended up having to jump in and help her make a PowerPoint, stuff like that. But instead of thinking to myself, how am I going to make a college law course? That doesn't even make any sense. I don't know what to do about it. I don't need to know at all. I just need to be able to help coordinate the people that do know how to do it to work together toward achieving a specific result.
Right.
So that's another example of a project. Ty, when I started that, you remember you and I, after the first kickoff call, before the second one, I was super stressed about it.
Mhm.
And then you and I actually, the timing ended up being perfect. And we spoke before that next call. And yeah, it ended up working out great.
That's awesome. I think too, to that point, because, I think there's professionals who are kind of entering into an existing pre-built system. And then there's individuals kind of which nothing wrong with that at all. And then there's individuals like yourself, I think, who are really, you're in kind of really a startup culture. You're trailblazing, you're creating new innovative things. And from my work in psychology, what I know is that there are things that cause barriers to follow through and being in flow. And one of the common trip ups that a lot of people have, professionals included, is if they don't think they can map out exactly what it's going to look like in advance, they'll freeze up, get anxious, or, just push it away and go and do something else like clean their room. And what's interesting, I think that you derived out of this, and I kept returning the skill to you over and over. And I think now you've really gotten it as a workable, usable, repeatable skill where if it's something totally brand new, you're able to go, wait, let me ask the right questions, let me derive the right answers, and I'll get a sense of internal confidence that I can translate in a leadership capacity to my team, and we can all move forward on this. So I think that's great. The key, I know people watching are wanting some takeaways. One of the big ones we've touched on already, which I am a big emphasizer in, that really revolves around my entire executive coaching process, is results-based systems and results-based thinking. And that sounds very bumper stickery, like, oh yeah, everybody likes results. But the reality is most people are not focused on results. They're focused on activities or tasks. And that's how 99% of the population orients their thinking. That's why they're stressed, overwhelmed, and they just don't follow through and they feel depleted. So that huge shift, I'm sure, has probably been the number one thing, that we've derived as a very useful thing. And obviously I've worked with your other team members to do the same. There's so much power when you instill it culturally too. And then I'm curious what maybe a number two or a number three would be in your own words. If there was some new way that you're looking at things differently, or how you're looking at maybe your own role, or what kind of comes to mind? I'm curious.
Yeah, two things. One is on the managing up aspect, and I mean this both kind of managing. The only person above me in the org chart is the CEO, so I mean managing up in the org chart, but also managing up in terms of people who you might have to manage like below you, air quotes, on the org chart, but they're older, more experienced, etc.
Right.
You're like, oh, this is going to be like I'm a 20-something managing a 45-year-old who has 20 years of real estate experience, right? That doesn't make any sense. But what I realized from both of those things is so long as you have crystal clarity on like kind of what the result that you want is, and you are able to, in a respectful way, obviously, be candid and share like direct, candid feedback with say you're managing up to the CEO, like, look, this is the goal you gave me. This is the result you said you wanted. However, we're doing XYZ that is detracting from that goal. And I either want to drop those things or push back on that we need to do them at all. Right. Which sounds crazy. You're effectively telling the CEO in not so many words, like, I'm not going to do this thing you told me to do, and I'm also going to not do these other three things.
Right.
But from the frame of results orientation, which again, like you said, sounds like a bumper sticker, right? When I initially told some of our other team members about this, and I've co-founded another startup recently, when I told my co-founder about this, before I got him to talk to you, he was like, this sounds like BS, but I was like, dude, this is life change. Go try it. I know it sounds like BS. Go try it. It's not a bumper sticker. It works. So having that results orientation, both for managing up in terms of up the org chart, but also people kind of older than you take the frame out of like a authority derived from hierarchy, and instead authority and leadership derived purely from kind of experience and the ability to
alignment with the result.
Yeah, I was about to say, in alignment with the result. So like and being the one helping set the result as well. That is super powerful, and you kind of change the social space when you're managing people older than you in that respect, where it stops being like, oh, this is awkward, a 20-something is managing me, and it's more of like, oh, this particular guy, irrespective of age, has a very clear vision for what this result is, and he's a project leader, and he's managing it well so far. So I'm absolutely going to follow his guidance, including going so far as to sometimes have to kind of help those older people step back in a line. You and I talked about this recently, like a month or two ago, the proper kind of effective way to help make sure they're still delivering the results they need to, even though it may feel to you like, oh my God, how am I going to discipline, air quotes, someone older than me?
Right. And before you move to number 3, what you just shared, I think, is the perfect illustration of what the entire thesis of coaching is, right? Coaching is like, I know that you do like weightlifting, for example. So coaching on like a sport or like weightlifting or a business or whatever, like you could have somebody that actually understands a area better than you, right? But the problem with the human mind, the problem with psychology is we get into patterns, we get into inertia. And so everyone hears the word results and they go, oh yeah, of course, business results. But when I break down somebody's calendar and I say, how have you spent the last 60 hours of your time in your last week? They'll realize that about 80% of their stuff is actually not a direct straight line to a result. It's just garbage inertia type activities that they're either responding to because they're distracted, or they're responding to because it feels urgent and it's a fire they got to put out. And they're really reacting to their company. They're not leading their company. And it's a totally different thing when you're able to step outside of it, see the pattern, and are able to help somebody really maximize their resources. And now, thankfully, you're able to do that from a managerial space with other people, which is really fantastic. So, okay, I love that. And you said there was another one that came to mind?
Yeah, the other thing that came to mind for me was also just kind of I guess it's a derivative, right, of the results orientation and having the mental models to be able to put that into action. But nothing seems daunting anymore, which sounds like supercilious, but I don't mean it that way at all. I just mean I now am extremely confident that I have the mental models and tools to take whatever the like big, scary, audacious goal is, and orient the results I want to achieve that goal, and then execute upon it. Like I feel like I have the toolkit to be able to do that for literally anything now. So nothing is scary anymore. Like I don't see a project coming down the pipeline. I don't see a particular area of focus coming from our CEO, and I'm like, oh God, how am I going to do that? I'm just like, I know I can do any of it. Literally, I'll give you a one concrete example. Take 30 seconds. I am leading a project with the former chief strategy officer of the Dubai International Financial Center. He's one of the 3 guys that founded it, named Chirag Shah, to build an international finance center within our jurisdiction. Do I know anything about building finance centers or finance law? Like very, very little, very little. But when I was given that project to work with him on that, I was like, okay, cool, let's do it. Like that's totally doable. Let's get after it.
Right. Which is fantastic, right? Because so many people are living their life with the trajectory of wanting to just feel safe and certain. And one of the key elements I share with people, business clients or, mental health clients or whatever, it's pretty much all one and the same these days, but is your quality of life is in direct proportion to how much uncertainty you're willing to take on, right? Because that's where all the growth is. That's where the passion is. That's where you actually have that pride of going, wow, I stepped into this like space. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just like pushed myself to figure out what the door was going to be on the other side, as opposed to, well, let me hang out in my comfort zone and do what I've always done. And this is, even if it's painful, it's at least the pain that I'm certain of, right? And I can predict. So, now with what you just said, right, that nothing is daunting, no matter what comes in, even if it's like, it seems like a giant amount of data coming into you from like a superior or a stakeholder or the market signal giving you something, right? You now know that there's a very easy way to kind of funnel that and translate it into a way to respond. What does that mean in terms of like going forward? And concretely, what I'm asking is, the mind is designed to create blind spots. And I know you've experienced this too. Like we've had this on our calls where like the one you were talking about where you needed to raise this amount of money. And I was like, wait, couldn't you just ask these 4 people and you could raise the money instead of like, what was it, like 40 or 50 people you didn't even think, you thought you had to go build something totally brand new and we could just, leverage existing resources. Yep. So those blind spots, right? That's where all the power is. Are there blind spots you feel have been kind of like removed now, like as you're kind of orienting yourself towards the future, either for like your specific role with this company, or I understand you have like another venture coming up, like has that opened up a mental door now that you feel you can walk through that maybe before in that stressed state, we kind of get tunnel vision, right? And we wouldn't have been able to see.
Yeah, I'm going to use, instead of our current company, Prosper, the other company I co-founded, Learn. I would not have in a million years even attempted to do that. We started three months ago, roughly. I would never have even attempted to do that prior to working with you, because at the time I was like way overwhelmed with just Prospero work. Why would I ever assume that I could also co-found another startup, be president of another startup on the side, right? That's a whole other company. It takes a whole other work process. But instead, with the kind of tools that I've gotten from this, a friend and I had the call about the initial idea. And at the end of the call, literally, we only talked for about an hour or two. And at the end of the call, both of us had direct action items to go execute on, and direct kind of paths forward to get this ball rolling basically instantly. And within a week, the company was formed. We had already raised $50,000 and had our first developer within a week. And that's not because I have a massive network or I'm doing anything magical. It's to your point, Ty. I cannot exaggerate the actual tangible real world impact of these mental models and tools. And then now going forward, this sounds crazy, but I'm co-leading the startup with our CEO, Jackson. I'm president. And anytime he gets stuck, has an idea, strategy, wants to change something, whatever, he calls me. And I have found I spend anywhere from 5 to at most 10 hours a week on this company. It's growing rapidly. We've raised several $100,000, have several employees, are about 60% done with the initial MVP, have a full marketing plan built. And I'm hardly working on it at all. Purely from the power of these mental models.
Right.
Purely from that.
Powerful. Very powerful. Yeah, this really brings up, I think, one of the key things that every business client I work with has to be able to learn to manage, which is leverage. Like the key to making sure that you're able to get ahead is leverage, right? And sometimes that means making sure that time is being delegated in a proper way, but people are resistant to delegate tasks to other people because they're so task oriented. They worry, oh, well, no one's going to do it quite the way I will. Well, they do if you go through the process of actually making sure everyone is aligned on what end result you want to make sure is achieved. And
on that point, Ty, I think something critical for people that have to manage others is something else that you helped me learn is that sometimes also you're aligned on the result and they're not going to do it the exact way you wanted. And that's okay because it still achieved the exact specific result you wanted. So I've even taken a step back from that, Ty, and instead of trying to work with them through kind of a full execution plan or action plan on the thing, I just make sure we are like crystal laser aligned on the desired result. And I say, go get after it. Like, go do whatever it is. I don't even want to hear about how you did it, by the way, unless you just want to tell me.
Right.
But come back to me when you have the result. And if you hit a roadblock that you absolutely cannot go around, under, or through, then come back to me and I'll help you problem solve. But I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I'm just going to help you think through it.
Right. Which is amazing too, because that's the exact type of like boss everyone wants to have. Right. But very often they're afraid to have that type of autonomy just because they've been like so accustomed to being spoon-fed instructions. Right. But you create a more independent, well-rounded, skilled employee who's got actual pride in their work, right? Because they're a real creator, co-creator with you. So to kind of sum up, just so people have a couple key takeaways, I think the first big one is, making sure shifting to a results-oriented psychology and then developing a set of tools where you can actually operationalize that. Because it's all well and good to say, oh yeah, I'm focused on results. But most people focus on results for 2% of the time, and then 98% they get back into stress mode where they're reacting. It's a totally different psychology. It's a totally different way about, going about things. You really have to embed it as a results-based process. Then your mind becomes like a razor, and it's able to cut through the crap. Exactly. Number two, I think, the big point you mentioned, I just want to sum up for people is, you can lead even somebody who's technically a superior from you, or lead someone below you so much more effectively by not, operating from a place of stress or insecurity, but really kind of realizing like, hey, aren't we all here for these concrete results? Okay, fantastic. Then this is what needs to happen to make that occur. And sometimes I need to candidly push back. Sometimes I need to enroll. Sometimes, there needs to be give and take. But if it's all framed through a master organizational principle of that, it makes everything so much easier. And then the third one you kind of mentioned too is, when you're able to have that sort of mental model in place, you're able to actually know with certainty and derive certainty from inside that whatever comes up, we'll be able to face it. And I think this is a big thing. There's a little metaphor I give people where most people are trying to position chairs in line on the deck of the Titanic, right? They're so trying to feel certain by making everything just so, and getting their inbox managed in this particular way, and focusing on all the total things that are really not the big picture, as opposed to making sure that they have a real psychological skill set built so that they've got internal certainty. They don't have to wait for the world to all align and be all exactly the way it needs to be in order for them to feel certain, but rather they just are able to go, yep, I'll be able to figure it out. So really good stuff. I really appreciate you sharing this. Any last little words you would recommend for anybody who's starting a business, building a business, has been doing this for a long time, based off what you have seen as as the patterns people will kind of get in? Any little tidbits you'd leave them with?
Yeah, one last tidbit, which is a bit of a big tidbit, but it's very simple to say, which is something that this has made me realize that, Ty, I don't even think you and I have discussed, but is like critically important to how I live my entire life now. Mm-hmm. Literally nothing is impossible, and everything is possible so long as it doesn't break the laws of physics, which sounds banal to say, but like Elon Musk started a car company that is changing the entire car industry, and at the same time privatized human space flight, and we'll have a colony on the planet Mars in 10 years. Okay. Jeff Bezos started a small internet company out of his garage, literally, that is now the largest, one of the most successful companies in the world. Right. And there are a million other examples of this from areas beyond business. I just happen to love business and focus on that, where like it has opened up the option space for me mentally to literally anything you can imagine you can do with the right mental models, the right mental tools, and the right mental framework. So long as it doesn't break the laws of physics, you can do it.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah. Very good. Strong words. Well, obviously our work continues. The city has to be built. There's plenty more to be done, but really appreciate you sharing some words of wisdom with the folks at home today. Yeah, hopefully people check out some of your work. If you want to give a last little plug for your companies real quick, that'd be great, just so people know how to maybe connect with you or find you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the easiest way to find anything about both Prospera and Learn, which we haven't like publicly launched yet, is on my Twitter. It's at the Trey Goff. I am constantly on Twitter, and I talk about both things there, and will continue to do so.
Fantastic. Awesome, Trey. Well, I'll look forward to connecting with you next time, and have a good weekend. Thanks so much.
You too, Ty. Thank you.
Yep. Peace.